It was just past 4 p.m. when Jason Statham stepped into a small bar outside Nashville, Tennessee. The place was quiet. Too quiet. Jason wasn't there for drinks or a scene. He had just finished visiting a nearby veteran hospital. He came in only to grab a glass of water and sit in peace. But peace wasn't what he found. In the far corner, a man with a loud voice and a red baseball cap was shouting at someone. Everyone else stared down at their drinks, afraid to speak up. The man being yelled at? An elderly gentleman, thin, dressed in a faded military jacket, hands trembling. Jason's eyes narrowed. The bully leaned in, mocking the old man's limp and calling him useless. Some of the bar patrons even chuckled nervously, pretending it was all a joke. Jason didn't smile. He took one step forward. That's all. And suddenly, the room changed. The bartender froze. A waitress dropped her glass. Everyone knew who Jason was, but no one knew what he would do next. And that silence was just the beginning. The old man tried to stand up, but he stumbled. His cane slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. The bully laughed hard, slapping the table. "Look at this guy," he barked. "Should have stayed in the war." Nobody helped him. Nobody said a word. Jason watched quietly. Every muscle in his body was still, the kind of still that only comes from training, the kind of still that comes before something unforgettable happens. The old man slowly turned to Jason. Their eyes met. In that one glance, Jason saw everything. Pain, pride, fear, and history. The man wore a patch on his jacket that read, "Korean War Veteran, 1953. That meant he had to be close to 90. His eyes were blue, watery, and tired. But they still carried something powerful. Honor. Jason picked up the cane. He walked it over, slowly and gently. "Sir," Jason said quietly, kneeling down. "May I help you to your seat?" The bar fell completely silent. The veteran blinked back tears. No one had called him sir in years. And now, Jason Statham, the man from the big screens, was kneeling beside him. The bully stopped laughing. But Jason wasn't done yet. The bully stood up, puffing out his chest. "Who do you think you are?" he spat. "Some movie tough guy?" Jason didn't look at him. He was still helping the veteran into a chair. The man's hands were cold. His fingers shook. Jason guided him with care like he was helping his own father. Finally, Jason stood. The bar still held its breath. The bully stepped closer. "This ain't Hollywood," he growled. Jason finally turned to him, calm, unshaken. "You're right," he said. "It's worse. Because men like you actually exist here." The bully's face turned red. "You want to make this a problem?" Jason took one slow step forward, eyes never blinking. "No," he said. "But you already did." The room was dead quiet. Even the bartender had stopped wiping the counter. No music played, just the sound of people realizing something rare was about to happen. The old veteran looked up at Jason and whispered, "Thank you, son." Jason nodded once. But then, he did something nobody expected. He turned to the entire bar and said 6 words that sent chills through the room. "Does anyone else want to speak?" Nobody moved. Nobody dared. And the bully backed up. The bar door opened again. Everyone turned. An old woman stepped in, holding a folded American flag in her arms. She wore a dark coat. Her hair was silver and neatly brushed. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying for days. She walked straight to the veteran Jason had helped. "James," she said softly, "I've been looking everywhere for you." The old man looked up. "Martha?" She nodded and gently placed the flag on the table. "This just came today," she whispered. They found David's remains. The entire bar seemed to stop breathing. David was their son. He died in Vietnam at age 19. The military never recovered his body. Until now. Jason's face tightened. Even he couldn't hold back the emotion. The bully who had laughed minutes earlier looked like a ghost now. James took the flag in shaking hands. His lips trembled. "He was just a boy," he said. Jason quietly pulled out a chair for Martha. She sat beside her husband, holding his hand. Nobody said a word. Tears filled the room, silent and real. And Jason stayed standing, like a guard, like a protector of something far bigger than pride. James looked at the folded flag in silence. Jason knelt down beside him again. "Your son was a hero," he said softly. James shook his head. "I was never there for him, Mr. Statham. I made it back. He didn't. I didn't even have the courage to wear my medals." Jason paused. "Do you know what courage is, James?" he asked. "It's showing up when no one else will." Jason reached into his coat and pulled out something small. It was a silver pin, a British Army service badge, one Jason had quietly carried with him for years. "I served too," Jason said. "But I've never seen pain like yours." James looked at the badge. "You?" Jason nodded. "Before the films, before the fame, I was just another soldier, quiet, watching others fall." Then Jason did something nobody expected. He took James's hand, opened his palm, and gently placed the badge inside. "You wore your pain like a medal," Jason said, "and that's more than most men ever carry." The room was still. The bully now looked smaller, like a child who had misbehaved. And for the first time, James cried. Not from shame, but from finally being seen. The bully stood frozen. Something had shifted inside him. His hands dropped to his sides. His face lost its color. Then, without a word, he stepped forward. The room tensed. Jason stood between him and the table. But the bully didn't raise his voice. He didn't puff his chest. He knelt down, right there on the wooden floor. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice cracked. "I lost my dad 2 weeks ago. I didn't know how to handle it. He served, too. No one had expected that. I saw this man in uniform and something snapped," he continued. "But I was wrong. I was so wrong." James looked at him, tears in his eyes. "What was your father's name?" "Roy," the man said, shaking. "Roy Benson, Navy, Vietnam." James nodded slowly. "Then let's honor him too." And just like that, the bar changed. What started as mockery became a moment of deep healing. Jason put a hand on the man's shoulder. "You did the hard thing," he said. "You told the truth." The man cried openly now, and no one laughed. Even the bartender wiped his eyes. Because in that moment, they weren't strangers anymore. They were a family, born from pain, but held together by truth. Jason didn't sit. He stayed standing by James and Martha like a guard on duty. The bar returned to quiet, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. This one was different, gentle, full of reflection. The waitress who had dropped her glass earlier walked over with 2 mugs of tea. "For the both of you," she whispered to James and Martha. Then she looked at Jason. "I lost my grandfather last year. He was Army. You just gave me back something I thought I lost." Jason nodded but said nothing. Outside it had started to rain. Light at first, then steady. The kind of rain that felt like the sky was grieving too. James looked at the folded flag again. His hand trembled. "Do you think he knew I was proud of him?" he asked Martha. She placed her hand on his. "He knew. He always knew." Jason looked at the couple, and something in his eyes softened. He had done 1,000 fight scenes on screen, but none of them ever felt like this moment. This was real. And this time, it wasn't about being tough. It was about being present. Suddenly, a cell phone rang. It came from the corner booth where an older man in a denim jacket had been sitting silently the whole time. He answered, whispered a few words, and stood up. Jason noticed him. The man walked over and looked at Jason with deep, tired eyes. "You don't know me," he said quietly. But I know who you are, and I saw what you did just now. Jason nodded. My name's Hank. I served with James in Korea. We lost touch. I came here today just to see if he still remembered me. James heard the voice, turned around and stood. Hank? They embraced. Slow, fragile, but strong. Two old men, once boys in battle, holding each other like long-lost brothers. The bar watched in silence. Tears were no longer hidden. Even the cook stepped out from the back, wiping his eyes with a towel. I brought something, Hank said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an old photo. 4 young soldiers, mud-covered, smiling through pain. That's us, he said, placing it in James's hands. James stared at it, then whispered, That's when we thought we were invincible. Jason looked at them and blinked away a tear. Hank pulled out one more thing from his coat, a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, a little torn at the edge. This was in my things. I never opened it because I thought I'd never find you again, Hank said. He handed it to James. With shaking hands, James opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, written in careful handwriting. It was from David, James and Martha's son. The date at the top read March 7th, 1970, just weeks before David was killed in Vietnam. James read the first few lines aloud, voice trembling. Dear Dad, if you're reading this, I guess I didn't make it back. I just want to say I'm proud of you. I grew up watching you fight for others even when no one saw you. The room was still. Martha covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Jason put a hand on James's back. The letter continued. If I don't come back, don't be sad forever. Just keep showing others what a real man looks like. I hope I made you proud too. By the time James finished the letter, even Jason had tears on his face. Not one person in that bar would ever forget that day. Because in one letter the hearts were healed. Jason looked at the small wooden box Hank had placed on the table. What's that? He asked softly. Hank swallowed hard. It's David's Bronze Star. I was the one who recommended him for it. James's hands trembled again. I never knew he got a medal. Hank nodded. He saved 3 men in his unit before the blast took him. He didn't run. He stayed. Martha placed a hand over her heart. Jason opened the box slowly. Inside, the Bronze Star shined even in the dim bar light. But it wasn't just the medal. It was the note folded beside it. A military citation, naming David for bravery beyond duty. Jason read it out loud, slowly, gently, with honor in every word. By the time he finished, even the jukebox seemed to hold its breath. The bar had become a sacred place. No one reached for their drinks. No one looked at their phones. They were watching something they may never witness again, a man learning the truth about his son after 55 years. James closed the box and held it to his chest. I thought I lost everything, he whispered. Jason placed a hand on his shoulder. Not everything, he said. You just found a piece back. As the storm outside grew heavier, the bar's door creaked again. A woman stepped in, dressed in a brown coat, middle-aged, quiet, with a soft face and kind eyes. She looked around nervously until her eyes landed on Jason. Mr. Statham? She asked. Jason stood. I'm Sarah. I work at the VA hospital down the road. A patient gave me something. Said I had to find you tonight. She handed him a small envelope. Jason took it carefully. The handwriting on the front was shaky but familiar. Jason sat down, opened it, and began to read. It was from Private Thomas Reed, an 89-year-old veteran Jason had visited earlier that day. Inside the letter, Thomas wrote, You're more than a film star. You're the reason people still believe men can be good. If you end up at Mick's bar today, find James. He needs something no war medal can give. He needs to be reminded that he mattered too. Jason stared at the letter. James leaned over. Thomas Reed, we served together. Jason smiled gently. He knew you were here. The whole room was silent again. This wasn't a random night. This was meant to happen. Jason stood up and walked toward the center of the bar. He gently tapped a glass with a spoon, like how people do before a wedding speech. The clinking sound echoed. "I didn't come here to be seen," he began. "I came here to rest after a long day." But God clearly had other plans. Everyone listened. Tonight we saw something real. Not in a movie, not on a screen, but right here, between these walls. He turned to James and Martha. "You reminded us what love looks like, what sacrifice means." Then to Hank. "You reminded us how friendships last even after the battles end." Finally, Jason turned to the rest of the bar. "We live in a world where heroes are forgotten, but not tonight, not here." He pointed to the table where James, Martha, and Hank now sat. "This table," Jason said, "is more important than any red carpet I've ever walked." The bartender stepped forward. "That table is now reserved. Forever." Everyone clapped softly. No one smiled wide. The moment was too sacred for that. The bully sat quietly in the corner, wiping his eyes. And outside, the rain finally began to slow. But inside, hearts had just started to open. Just as the moment felt like it would settle, a soft voice came from the back of the bar. I knew David too. Everyone turned. An older man, sitting in the corner, slowly stood up. He wore a weathered coat and had a thin cane. No one had noticed him come in. "My name is Robert Givens," he said. "I served in Vietnam, with your son." James's breath caught. Martha gripped his hand tightly. "I was with him the night he died," Robert said. "He saved my life. That's why I walk with a cane, not lie in a grave." The room went still again. "I never had the courage to find you," Robert whispered. "I didn't know what to say. But tonight, after seeing what happened here, I had to speak." James stood. Slowly, their eyes met. And then, just like that, Robert walked over and hugged him. It wasn't the hug of strangers. It was the hug of two broken hearts who had waited over 50 years to be put back together. And once again, the bar fell into silence. But this time it was a silence that healed. Jason stepped away for a moment and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number only a few people in the world had. A man answered on the second ring. It was Gary Sinise, actor and founder of the Gary Sinise Foundation, known for supporting military veterans across America. "Gary," Jason said, "I need a favor, a big one." Jason explained everything. James, the letter, the medal, the folded flag, and the moment they were all living through in this small forgotten bar. There was a pause on the line. Gary replied, "Say no more. I'll send my team. We'll honor this family properly." Jason smiled. "Thank you, brother." As he returned to the group, Jason placed his hand gently on James's shoulder. "I made a call," he said. "There's someone who wants to give David the recognition he never got." James blinked. "Why would he do that?" "Because he believes in men like your son," Jason said. "And so do I." Jason didn't need to say more. The look in his eyes said it all. This wasn't about fame. This was about dignity, something that had been lost for too long. But now, it was finally being restored. As the rain eased outside, a young boy about 10 years old walked into the bar with his mother. They had seen the crowd from outside and were curious. The boy walked straight over to the dusty upright piano sitting in the corner. No one had touched it in years. He pressed a key, then another. Jason watched him with interest. "What's your name, son?" Jason asked. "Eli," the boy said shyly. "I play at church sometimes." Jason smiled. "Would you play something for us?" Eli nodded, then sat down on the old piano bench. His little fingers touched the keys and a soft hymn began to fill the room. Amazing Grace. As the melody poured out, people turned. Tears returned to many eyes. Even the toughest men in the room stared into their drinks, overwhelmed. Martha held James's hand tightly. Robert closed his eyes and whispered along with the words. Jason stood, head slightly bowed. And there, in a small-town bar that once held pain and anger, something holy began to grow. A child. A song. A moment no one planned. It was as if David was saying goodbye. And somehow, everyone felt it. Even the piano seemed to cry. Just as the final notes of Amazing Grace faded into the warm silence, headlights appeared through the window. A black SUV pulled up outside the bar, then another. Everyone inside turned. Jason checked his watch. Right on time, he said. Gary Sinise himself stepped out of the vehicle, dressed in a simple black coat. His face was calm and respectful. Two veterans from the Gary Sinise Foundation followed, carrying a folded American flag inside a glass display case. Gasps filled the room. Gary walked straight to James, shook his hand and said softly, "We don't forget men like David." James was speechless. Tears ran down his cheeks again. This time he didn't try to wipe them away. Gary placed the flag display on the bar in front of everyone and opened a small velvet box. Inside was a Medal of Honor replica, engraved with David's name. "For your son," Gary said, "and for you." Martha covered her face. The room was dead silent. Gary nodded to Jason. "You did the right thing, brother." Jason stepped back, letting the moment shine. It was no longer just a story. It had become a legacy. The bartender, a quiet man named Ray, stepped forward. "I served too," he said, wiping a tear. "Desert Storm. I've never seen anything like this in my life." He pulled out a bottle of aged bourbon from beneath the bar, a bottle he'd saved for something special. He poured 3 small glasses. One for James, one for David, and one for every man or woman who didn't make it home, Ray said. He lifted his glass, hands trembling. The room followed. Even Eli, the young boy who had played the piano, stood with a cup of apple juice. "To the ones we lost," Jason said. "To the ones we carry," Martha whispered. "And to the ones we become," Hank added. Everyone drank in silence. No shouting, no music, just tears and honor. Then Jason did something no one expected. He took off his coat and carefully laid it over James's shoulders. "You've carried the cold long enough," he said gently. "It's time you felt warm again." James looked at him, eyes full of gratitude. And for the first time in decades, he smiled. A real, peaceful smile. As the night drew to a close, people slowly began to leave. But no one left unchanged. Jason helped James and Martha to their feet. Before they walked out, James turned to the crowd, holding the medal and folded flag close. "I didn't think I'd live to see a moment like this," he said softly. "But tonight, you all gave me something that war and time could never take away." His voice cracked. "You reminded me that I was never forgotten. And more importantly, neither was my son." A tear rolled down Jason's cheek. The bully, still seated at the edge of the room, stood and approached. "Thank you for forgiving me," he whispered. James patted his shoulder. "It takes a man to say sorry. You did good tonight." As James, Martha, and Jason walked into the cool night air, the small town bar behind them was no longer just a place to drink. It had become a place of healing, a place where strangers became family, and silence became honor. Dear viewer, if this story touched your heart, made you cry, or reminded you of someone you love, don't just scroll away. Like this video to honor every forgotten hero. Subscribe to keep stories like this alive. And most of all, comment below with the name of a veteran you know or love. Let's flood this section with their names and give them the tribute they deserve. Because sometimes all it takes is one moment, one story, one name, to remind the world what real heroes look like. Thank you for watching. You are not forgotten.